Hey, Goko here with a very exciting video. Today I can officially reveal the Novaflare changes coming to HSR in 4.2. We'll go through most of them, the good and the bad, and my thoughts on them, and full guides on them with my detailed thoughts and in-depth calculations will come within the week. But to make today's video even more interesting, I've invited one of the best showcase YouTubers out there and my friend Ruri to provide a secondary viewpoint for these changes.
Hi, Ruri here from Ruri Goko channel. I mainly do character showcase stuff on in-game content for both entertainment and education purpose, and revealing character true potential you might not have seen anywhere.
So please be sure to sub to his channel if you want to see the ultimate performance of a character. And now let's check out the Novaflares. Let's start with our very first ever limited unit, Seele, one of the most complex characters HSR has to offer even to this day. It's nice and pretty nostalgic for her to be back in some form again, and the previous Novaflare of Sparkle will also be helping her a bunch. Now, Seele has 1.0 kit multipliers bringing her down, a kit mechanic that works against her versus HP inflation, and some other clunky issues including buff uptime and resurgences being stolen. So did her kit get a resurgence? Well, for multipliers, we got a large boost to her skill from 220 to 360%, or around a 1.64 times increase in damage. On top of that, her ult went from 425% to 720%, so increased by about 1.69 times. As for helping versus HP inflation, we got a new addition to the skill. After an ally target attacks, including herself, if the target ends up below 50% HP, Seele can automatically use a skill that does not consume SP or regenerate energy, and this can happen once per Seele turn. If you could theoretically activate this every Seele turn, I mean it's possible in pure fiction, you are getting double the non-resurgent skills you got before, and that is an astronomical increase to her damage. It can also activate resurgence just like a normal skill would. Now for buff uptime, we got an increase to her speed buff on her skill. It is now 3 turns instead of 2, but the real deal is her resurgence's amplification state buff lasting for 3 turns rather than 1, meaning it should be up the whole fight now, or versus fights with fewer enemies, at least up more often than not. Speaking of amplification, the res pen in her A4 was also increased to 25% versus 20%. And finally, instead of the worst trace type known to humans or bears, we now get a stacking 50% damage buff up to 3 stacks for 3 turns. This can therefore fall off in some fights like bosses or not even be stacked up at all, which is slightly annoying, but when she's in her best niche, she now excels even more. Altogether, she has a possible permanent 230% damage buff on her now. Welcome back Shui Yi, except the multipliers. Her death trace didn't change, and the only other changes are in her E1 and E6. E1 now also lets you ignore 20% death when the enemy is below 80% HP. I would have loved the condition removal, conditional CR is cringe, but alas, nice buff to the E1 regardless. E6 however got a major facelift and went from a weak one-turn thing that procced tiny bits of damage and didn't even trigger resurgence, to a 3-turn duration effect that procs 30% true damage instances based on Seele's ultimate damage and does in fact trigger Seele's talent. Now these damage procs are huge with their 30% multiplier, considering the fact that we are getting more Seele ultimates, and then her ultimate got mega buffed in damage. You won't always be able to activate its effect because Seele aims for ult one-shots, but at least on enemies you cannot one-shot, you have a better way of bringing them down faster. I think the changes are really cool and lead to a lot of fun clears, especially when considering Saridra, who loves skill spammers. Her kit has a high ceiling, so buffing her multipliers and not changing kit identity, whilst also technically adding even more possibilities to her kit, is a great way to go about a Novaflare. I just think her kit being based on kill thresholds still, for resurgence will hurt her, and so outside of pure fiction or enemy scenarios where boss keeps summoning things like Nikador, she will still suffer when HP goes up again, especially because her big new 150% damage buff is also tied to kills. At least, she has a defined niche, and I expect her to be relevant and possibly a top clearer in said niche for a long time.
For Seele, I think major problem pre-Novaflare lies in two main things. Firstly, being a 1.0 unit with 1.0 damage multiplier in 2026 with gigantic HP inflation on in-game content won't cut it. So despite being a no-brainer Novaflare, giving her a much-needed max multiplier across most attacks is justified. Although I personally would want her basic attack to deal extra damage too, since compared to other DPS units, Seele at the highest level of gameplay does utilize basic attack a lot, but hey, can't expect everything, right? The second part is her whole kit tied to killing enemies, which means you cannot kill anything on the stage, or there is no small enemy for her to ramp up, she's not gonna feel good to play. There are two ways to approach this problem. One is trying to fix those issues, whether making her tie less to killing or just give her extra condition for resurgence. But another way is just to double down on her kit by giving her even more reward from killing or reducing the enemy HP, which is what the Huohuo choose and we have right now. I think post Novaflare, she will have a strong performance in her niche, like state with a lot of small enemy, but will still suffer on pure single target state with 0 kill given.
Now, the only other 1.0 character here is Welt, so let's check him out next. He doesn't do damage, any meaningful damage buffing, and his delays don't work versus most enemies. He needs too many stats and for little gain. Well, that was before 4.2 because luckily Huohuo has heard most of our prayers. So damage-wise, enjoy 2 extra bounces on his battle skill. The energy didn't change, but we are hitting for 5 times 72% rather than 3 times 72%. And remember, each hit versus a slowed enemy means talent damage proc, so we get 5 times 72% on top of the talent multiplier, which was buffed to 100% of his attack. So we went from overall a 396% MV skill to a 860% one, or a 2.17 times increase. I mean, he needed it. We also got a new trace that gives us additional damage procs after using a basic or skill, kind of like a permanent and stronger version of his old E1. The ult didn't get any buff in damage, but the talent being increased still helps the ult. What the ult did get though is a new debuff which drastically helps the whole CC res enemy situation and in a smart way. The ult's innate imprison delay got nerfed from 40 to 12%, but that barely even happened, and his ult now also inflicts the weightless state on all enemies for 2 turns. When these targets are attacked, they are delayed by 4% each time up to 8 times or 32% total. Combine that with the imprisonment for a 44% total delay. But you might not always get the full delay since we need tons of attacks. But what's important is that this doesn't come from a direct crowd control effect or imprison effect, which are easily resisted these days. It comes as a straight up delay. Think about how enemies like the Ice Axe dude can still delay you even if you have resistances. No matter their resistance, Welt can finally do his job. But we need better buffing too, and so Weightless comes in and provides another benefit in the form of 40% def reduction to enemy targets in the state, a 1.27 times damage increase in a vacuum. If that wasn't enough, his Retribution trace got revamped to now give a stacking 10% damage buff to allies when attacking weightless enemies, up to 100% rather than the old 12% vulnerability. This takes a little to stack since it's per ally, but it will be better than the vuln eventually, and it will be much better very quickly if you're a frequent attacker. Now I think every Nihility Nova got this, and I'm especially happy Welt did. We have EHR conversion. Stack to 80% EHR, and now you get 80% attack, making his stat requirements much cooler on the attack side of things. But this still doesn't remove the problem of balancing crit and EHR that he had before. There are a couple of extra changes, but the details will be in his guide, so on to Eidolons. The two I want to talk about are his E4 and E6. What do you mean E4? Someone top to Jiaoqiu's completely and utterly broken E4? Well, unlike pretty much every E4 in the game, Welt's new one is actually insane, with a 30% all-type res reduction on weightless targets. At E4, he is a top-tier amper in the game now. E4 is a lot of copies, but some OG players definitely have this by now, so they get an even bigger win. Finally, his E6 gives him 120% crit value when using a skill or ultimate, buffing his DPS potential through the roof on top of all the other base kit benefits. Again, it's an E6, but Welt lovers can safely come back and enjoy a beast carry at E6. He got a little better in all aspects at E0 and can finally delay without problems, so his whole kit identity was fully respected and boosted, which I'm happy about. But his power at E0 still leaves a lot to be desired, and I wouldn't say it's until E4 that he becomes a true powerhouse in buffing or damage. At E0, he won't be topping the DPS charts anytime soon, and in fact Carry Welt has some anti-synergy with his own kit needing tons of attacks. He can't attack enough for his own damage percent buff, and his supports mostly can't if you want maximum delay. But he at least now offers what he did in the past at a much higher level if running him as a support, a way to bring buffs and some damage to the team, even a sustainers team, whilst also providing utility for said teams to live, even if it will be weaker than in the past due to the speed inflation enemies are receiving, which will also hurt his buff uptime. The delay also comes with the risk of hurting your team's rotation by reducing enemy hit energy, or delaying helpful enemy mechanics like Nigador summons. Anyways, I'll be going much more in depth into problems in his guide.
Well, Novaflare is surprisingly strong on paper. In fact, it looks too strong at first glance. 40% perma defense down, 100% DMG buff, up to 44% delay on each ultimate, and effect hit rate to attack conversion. Even E4, which is most of the time a useless Eidolon, is one of the strongest E4 we get now with a whopping 30% raise pen. But instead of glassing, let me also discuss his Novaflare's problem. First is his weightless state, which gives access to all of Welt damage amplification. For E0 or E1 Welt, it is impossible to hit a 2-turn ultimate, and with only a 44% delay with us being much slower than most elite and the current in-game, the enemy is always gonna move at least once during Welt ultimate rotation, making him a not so reliable unit if you're gonna play sustainless. One way to partially fix it is to use out mid elite or mid boss turn to cancel an action, but that means you will take hit here and there and you need to clear as fast as possible or your team will slowly die. For E2 however, it is possible to hit a 2-turn ultimate without basic and skill with tutorial like cone. A very fast elite is still gonna move, but anything below 150x speed will barely move if not moving at all. And you still need a fast eagle set with a dance holder to keep it up though. But hey, a permanent CC on most enemy is very favorable for sustainless. The buff of time on weightless state also directly tied to your Welt Eidolon. At E0 to E1, you have some drop off here and there, especially if you're not fast enough. The DMG buff is nice for units that can hit enemy off turn frequently, but not so much for the Remembrance Fellow. 40% death down is strong though. And the second problem is his new trace. The effect hit rate to attack conversion is nice, but it's also small trap, since effect hit rate main stat and crit percent stat are on the same relic slot. Building a full crit well with a lot of HSR is really hard. So you might have to choose wisely on whether you want his debuff, delay, and his slow, or if you just want his damage and just do weightless state and you're okay with getting hit, so you just build full crit, right? Anyway, even though there's a problem here and there, he's now a useful character, and I'm pretty sure many old or veteran players with him lying on their account will find him useful in many situations. He has stronger debuff, he has more amp, pretty decent for a standard unit if you get a hold of him.
Well, now jumping all the way to 1.5 we have Huohuo. Her problems are SP issues and sustaining issues, but otherwise, her energy utility has always been a great boon, and her helping out elation teams is another way she's holding onto the top tiers of the meta until she eventually gets replaced by Hyacinth Electric Boogaloo. The first way to help out her sustain is an overall healing multiplier increase on her skill. From 54.6% of her HP and a flat 1456 distributed as a blast, to 62.4% of her HP and a flat 1664. I would have loved an AoE heal to be honest, but more heals is still good. She now also gets to heal the ally with the lowest HP on ally turn start or ultimate usage. The 2 allies are healed each time now, and she still gets to keep the below 50% heal too. This will actually help a lot for her sustain, but it's provided your allies act or use ults at often bad timings to survive, and slower allies will suffer. But apart from that, the sustain upgrades are done in the base kit, and she received no inbuilt damage reduction or attack debuffs to help put her into a true top spot for specifically sustaining. Now, she can keep a team that can move often topped up, sure, but preventing one-shots isn't possible, and healing up from a near one-shot in an emergency is still hard for her. On the SP side of things, we did get that part of E1 everyone wanted into her base E0 kit. Now Divine Provision lasts 3 turns rather than 2, and on top of that, her ult also gives Divine Provision now too. However, this still won't mean much if she needs to skill a lot for energy, or if your team is getting dunked on, but in easier fights she got better. Her traces then actually gave her the idea I had in my Novaflare speculation, where she now gets an immediate skill, but they actually gave it without using a skill. I thought it'd be pretty strong to have, but hey, I do not mind, and now Huohuo can first turn ult and greatly improve her team's first rotation speed since her ults are more team ults. Her A4 didn't get changed into an actual banger trace, but it did get a small banger addition tacked onto it, now giving an additional 24% attack or 64% total to allies with 160 or higher max energy cost. The units she works best for get more buffing, how nice. Just a shame it wasn't changed to benefit more than just attack scaling characters. Now, funnily enough, when moving on to her Eidolons, her E1 didn't lose the Divine Provision extension, which is now pretty useless going all the way to 4 turns. The real benefit is a new small increase to healing bonus, and that speed buff is still there from before. I am pretty disappointed by Huohuo's Novaflare since her major problems don't really get fixed. Her emergency sustain is still weak enough that you can be forced to skill spam at times, which renders the Divine Provision extension irrelevant, and even when skill spamming, you can die with slower teams. Other than that, nothing really changed except for a minor buff to specifically high energy attack scaling or converting carries. The buff to her first rotation will help a decent amount, and she's already top tier when needing a sustain outside of certain fights, but I guess they don't want to go overboard when new sustains will have to do more than her, which is a shame.
With Huohuo Novaflare, I think Huohuo might have misjudged her problem. If you have seen my Sparksy run on Anomaly Arbitration Plight mode, having an enemy drop you from 100% HP to 8 HP is not fun at all, and there's no reliable way to heal up from that point as well. Right now, the problem of non-hyacinth, non-signature Lycone DHPT sustain is the effective HP pool. It is not enough to keep your team alive, and the problem is not the buffing or debuffing power at all. In my opinion, when a Novaflare sustain need the most in version 4 is not more team amp but some sort of damage reduction, team saving ability to keep more comfort to the player. Make them reliable enough to put them on the strongest in-game mode, and if you want a bit more, also make them more SP positive for the team. Huohuo Novaflare did try to fix her SP issue by making her Divine Provision stay for a longer duration, but it is useless if your team is constantly dying all the time and you have to skill every turn. So yeah, I'm kinda disappointed with her Novaflare, so yeah, we just go to the last one.
Anyways, last but not least, we jump all the way up to 2.3 with Firefly's Novaflare. Now, thanks to the Dahlia, she was already brought back to the top tiers of the meta, but her kit still has some issues like sort of redundant passives, and a kit that doesn't work well without the Dahlia. Spoiler alert, she still needs her. The first change Firefly got was to her enhanced skill in the combustion state. Before, it would add fire weakness to the enemy in front of her, and she could ignore toughness on adjacent targets thanks to her A2. What now happens is she just implants onto all targets in her blast. This is more toughness damage, so more damage, and this is also a buff to her Dahlia synergy, who does fixed toughness versus implanted enemies. It's a small change that leads to a lot of benefits, especially for pure fiction. Other than that though, we gotta move all the way to her traces for any other changes. Since the old A2 is irrelevant because of her 3-target implant, we instead get a 25% break effect buff on top of a change to her combustion countdown. If she inflicts a weakness break during her enhanced abilities, the countdown is delayed by 10%, up to 3 times per combustion state. Now, this actually technically would hurt optimized clears that aim for an action just after the state ends before 150 AV, but luckily it doesn't carry over on wave reset, so if you break 3 enemies wave 1, you're safe on wave 2. Now, if there are 2 enemies wave 1, unlucky. This change offers new speed goals in some scenarios or lets you ignore speed tuning. It just makes things more annoying to have to adjust constantly, but we got relic loadouts now, I guess. Also, it's nice in PF with DDD spam, for example, for infinite combusting all over the place. So an actual banger change was in her A4. Remember on release we talked about how bad her super break multis were and that she was using Harmony MC as a catalyst for her multipliers? Well, she took that personally and tripled her innate super break multipliers. This doesn't mean triple damage since the team does damage and also provides super break multipliers, but it is a large boost to her already great power. Other than that, the only change is in her E2, which is the change I didn't think was going to happen, but now Firefly can activate her E2 every single turn, making E2 Firefly one of the best Eidolons in the game damage increase-wise from E1. Of course, you can't always activate it, and also activating it in some cases can hurt you, for example if you need a boss to act for their mechanics, but in a lot of scenarios this just makes E2 Firefly a complete beast. Buffs to the E0, buffs to the E2. I don't think they really fixed anything about Firefly, maybe her over-reliance on super break supports. They just mostly made her stronger and made E2 pullers even happier, and there are a whole ton of E2 pullers. She still needs Dahlia to do anything meaningful, a unit who is Firefly's real Novaflare. So she will last longer in the meta than if her kit stayed the same, especially with the E2 buff of Vertical Investors. But a Novaflare coming out when she actually fell off and one that fixed most of her problems would have been nicer than this. Oh well.
First of all, I express my condolence to fellow Galaxy Ranger enjoyer, the Erudition and Han Super Break DPH who got left behind. There are 2 points I want to mention on her Novaflare, one good and one not so good. Starting with the good one, her E2 and the conversion rate on the Super Break. Previously, if you want to run a sustained Firefly with Bronya, you might face the problem where you might not be able to hit a 360% break effect requirement, especially if you have too much speed and less to 0 break effect substat. But having that requirement reduced to 300 and getting plus 25% free break effect from her trace completely fixed this issue. And now she can enjoy a full super break multiplier from her A6, which is also got a buff too. This also applies to many players who run Firefly, Dahlia, Phil, Gallagher at full E0, S0. They will definitely feel that their Firefly are much stronger from this chain, which is a good one. Her E2 is now also a literally god in pure fiction, and many other one boss plus 4 summon scenario. Because now you can just run Bronya and proc the extra action over and over again, which greatly increase her damage deal overall. So as for the not so good point, her complete combustion extension. The old Firefly's cooldown sit at 143 AV on wave 2, but with the change, as Guoba mentioned before, there's a problem if there aren't enough units to break on wave 1, as it only takes one 10% delay to push the countdown out of 0 cycle on wave 2. This might sound like it's not a problem for majority of players, but for past 0 cycle, you could end wave 1 with only 1 break, then you go to wave 2 with 2 breaks left, then you cool down, and even with the perfect setup to get back into another op, Firefly last action on her second op would land at 185 AV or 357 AV in total, which put her outside of cycle 2. It is niche, but for those who are struggling on 7 to 8 cycle clear on the other side, this might make or break their 3-star run in MOC, which is quite concerning. But overall, a bigger number buff, a bit easier to build, and most Firefly players will love the change.
So I hope you enjoyed this buff overview video and let us know your thoughts on the buffs and which ones are your favorites. Like and sub to catch all the guides for these units coming this week, and again, please go sub to Ruri if you want to see these new characters in action with great in-depth annotations on how the runs work. Thank you to my amazing YouTube members, thanks for watching, and have a Guoba day.